Hello.
Our story begins in the fog-covered city of the capital. Coruscant sat idly, waiting for his demagogues to make another decision that would surely push the Republic further into becoming an empire. At his desk, inside the Senate building, was the soon-to-be Emperor. Only a few more months to go until everything he had been working on for the past few years was finished. His eyes closed and he smiled. Outside of his office, senators were marching up and down the corridors. They had a session coming and more bills to vote on. Among those senators was Ta, chowing down on some delicious eels from Mon Cala. In the pod next to him were some members of another alien species that looked on in disgust. Up a couple floors across the chambers were two friends. The young Senator Rio Chuchi was smiling as Tyner Palmo told her a story about a recent experience in the Mid-Rim. Walking into their conversation was Padme. In her hands were a couple data pads. The story wasn't interrupted, but she handed out each of these tablets to her friends before smiling warmly and walking back to her own pod. Away from all these various feelings and people was a young Jedi, someone younger than anyone within this chamber, and she felt fury. Barriss Offee had laid bombs throughout the Senate, and she waited for the session to begin. The Senate was preparing to vote more emergency powers into Palpatine's control. Accompanying command was full legislative direction over the annual budget. It would essentially reduce the voting power in the Senate so that Palpatine could direct trillions of funds however he wanted. Barris had planned the bombing for the Jedi Temple, and she was about to do both the Senate and the Jedi Council chambers, but realized that she wouldn't have enough to make sure Palpatine was killed. He was her main target at the end of the day. She sat inside a small vent in the ceiling, looking down at all the people. Her hand hovered over the detonator, and she breathed shallowly. The young Jedi didn't need a manifesto. She believed that what she was doing was right. In her mind, the Senate had corrupted the Jedi Council, and it was in this belief that cutting the head off the snake would save the Order. Her hope was that she would be right in destroying the entire Senate. Barris held her hand over her heart and closed her eyes. The beat was thumping like a parade drum, and she couldn't have this type of anxiety rolling through her. This act needed to be precise. After waiting for several minutes, the center pod in the Senate chambers rose from the floor. A small horn buzzed, alerting the debating representatives that their master had arrived. At least, that was how Barris internalized it. She scratched her thumb with her chin and bit her lip. Tension rose within her, and then all of the anxiety that had been building for at least 20 minutes stopped. She had seen war, death, destruction, brainworms, and worse. But for some reason, her heart couldn't handle this action until this moment. When she heard Palpatine's voice stretch out across the hall, she felt her hand move almost robotically, as if not a thought, a person, or even an internal change of determination could stop her. Barris slammed her finger down on the trigger, and a rumbling could be heard. It started below the floor and slowly ascended through the building. She tapped her hip where another button sat, and every single file inside the security room became corrupt. It was essentially a droid popper reconfigured into a weapon to overheat the main terminal. Her hope was to destroy any remaining evidence that she had been here, if there were any. She pulled a hood over her head and used a grapple in the bottom of the vent to ascend a vent that led straight to the skyline. The foggy day that covered the city of Coruscant made this the perfect escape route. Her hands didn't tremble, but she pulled harder and harder before using the force to shatter the vent cover and leap out of the duct. Barris rolled across the floor and she listened. The rumbling was getting louder and louder. She jumped onto her speeder and shoved the accelerator back, lifting off the surface of the Senate building and escaping into the fog as bright oranges, reds, and yellows bounced across the city skyline from behind her. Following the light came the gigantic sound that shattered glass windows, not to mention the shockwave that sent people off their feet, speeders into buildings, debris from the actual explosion, and the creation of a number of external casualties. Inside the Jedi Temple, Anakin was awoken from his sleep. Yeah, he was sleeping in past noon. He got to his feet and rushed out without a shirt on, practically blinding one of the many Jedi nuns in the temple, before remembering to get his robes. He and hundreds of other Jedi were being dispatched with the Coruscant Guard and the currently planet-stationed clone legions to help people in harm's way. The fog still hovered over the skyline, so the extent of the damage could not be seen. But due to the sheer casualty counts, the earthquake spikes, and the outward damage, it was clear that the Senate building was probably leveled. It would take hours for the sight to be seen, and it would be horrendous. People couldn't believe how it was possible, and furthermore, the culprit was unidentifiable. There were a few people who had seen a smaller person escape from the wreckage on an unidentifiable speeder, but their face couldn't be seen. Barris did return to the temple, but she used underground passageways to do so, and entered through a meditation room and sealed off her exit, so the people who saw her go into meditation believed that she had been there the entire day, which wasn't exactly uncommon for her thanks to Master Luminara's difficult training regiment. With Barris temporarily cleared from being a suspect, Anakin remained at the Detritus and probed extensively for his secret wife. The 501st, Ahsoka, and Coruscant Guard followed General Skywalker further into the destroyed building. Across the city, inside the Jedi Temple, the Council gathered together with a few members who weren't at the Senate building. Yoda collected these wise masters so that he could pass an idea onto them. The Grand Master suggested that in the absence of the Galactic Senate, that the Jedi take a hold of the Republic. Master Mundi, who had returned to the temple to send reinforcements, agreed with the idea. Opa Rancisis questioned the integrity behind such a move, but once Yoda explained the importance of the actual move, he couldn't help but see the rationale behind it. If the Jedi could take control over the Senate, or the role they had, then perhaps they could rectify things for the wider galaxy. The Jedi didn't care about the power that came along with it. They'd been one of the most influential groups in the galaxy for over a millennia. They cared about ending this conflict, and especially for Yoda, this was incredibly personal, because it was his student who essentially started this war. He told the other counselors present that he would like to communicate to the clone army directly. Individuals like Captain Tarkin would do anything within their power to stall their chances at unifying the galaxy. Because the Order was selfless, they believed that they were the right individuals for this role. Now, I wonder what the irony in that is. Inside her chambers, Barriss Offee knelt down on a meditation pad. It was also used as a bed, and she wept. Her eyes were heavy, and her heart even more so. She had recently seen new reports break out from the local news outlets confirming the death toll. It was horrendous. What made everything worse for her was the fact that the death toll only depicted people that worked in the Senate building and bystanders who happened to get hit by the explosion and the debris that followed it. None of these people were representatives or senators. There was also another chain event that occurred a couple hours following her bombing. It was a fuel tank leak that detonated an entire block of city. People, apartments, shops, and common areas were destroyed in the fuel leak explosion. Her guilt was immeasurable, and she just wanted nothing more than to cease to exist. Her intentions were pure in her mind, and now she had seen the cost of this darkness and the war. She had the supplies to do something that would make a difference, and in the hours following the detonation, it felt like no difference was made. As she cried, a knock came at the door, and when Barris cleared her face with her sleeve, Ahsoka walked in. She could see the amount of pain on her friend's face, and she asked if she were alright. The two of them would sit and talk with each other for a couple hours. In this, Ahsoka would reveal that the Jedi were withholding her and Anakin from beginning the Kid Neimoidian siege. Barris was shocked. She and Master Skywalker were supposed to be at the core world, but as it turns out, this was a different timeline. The entire time their talk went on, Barris got more and more upset, because she was seeing the exhaustion on Ahsoka's face. Anakin sent her to the temple because he could sense her anguish in all the death. He didn't want her to see even more dead bodies, and as such, she was sent home. The two friends would spend the rest of the day with each other, and even fall asleep at opposite ends of Barris's room, talking about something deep. What it was escaped their minds when they woke up. However, for Barris, this meant that she would be abandoning the Jedi Order. She had made a terrible mistake, and she couldn't face the reality of her actions. Taking a Jedi T6 shuttle, she would leave Coruscant and disappear into hyperspace. It made Ahsoka's wake-up even more daunting. Yet, the most outrageous part of Ahsoka's wake-up wasn't the missing Barriss Offee. It was Anakin with 4 temple guards. The EMP burst Barriss used came from a faulty cellar, meaning that it never corrupted the drives, and her face was seen in the lower levels of the Senate building. Luckily for the Jedi, only Anakin had seen this recording and he informed the Council, which is why the temple guards came with him. They were going to arrest Barriss, but because Ahsoka was alone, she would be questioned. Luckily for everyone involved, she wouldn't be convicted, because temple security footage showed her and Anakin training throughout the days before, and proof that Master and Apprentice were inside the temple during the attack. Furthermore, they weren't on Coruscant a week prior to the bombing, so it would simply be questioning instead of a rapid jump to conclusions. Crazy idea. In the meantime, the Senate building would be excavated. They hadn't recovered all the bodies yet, and honestly, most of the people that were considered important hadn't been found. People, Jedi, and clones were working dedicatedly to remove the rubble. The Jedi were the biggest help, both in using their sabers and the Force to lift debris that vehicles had a difficult time getting to. Yoda would be a massive contributor to using the Force to move the rubble. But there were also other movements in the world of Jedi and Republic leadership. With the Senate considered gone, the people needed a leader, or leadership, and the military wasn't banking on oligarchs to take control. This was a military operation and a war, and because the clones were absolutely key to winning this war, it was decided by the clone leadership that they would vote on the individuals that would take command of the Republic war effort until the peace came. A representative from the Jedi Order and a representative from the Republic Industrial Military Complex came to a table and discussed their reasonings for holding office during this time of war. The Jedi happened to be 300-year-old Jedi Master Plo Koon, and the Republic officer was Jedi hater Wilhuff Tarkin. The Iridinian man spent more time hassling the Jedi Master than Plo did talking about Republic officers. Plo's concern first and foremost was clone protection and Republic maintenances. To the clone leadership who joined this call from across the galaxy, this was the most appealing choice. After all, the clones had been serving with the Jedi on the front lines, and aside from a few cases, like Krell, they were more trustworthy. A lot of this also came from the two individuals who spoke. Plo had one of the better reputations amongst the clones, and Tarkin wasn't really cared for, not to mention his rhetoric was pretty abysmal during this call. He relied heavily on his relationship with Palpatine, not the fact that he and his people could provide a group of leaders that could adequately serve the clone army. Plo was able to lay out a plan, and while Tarkin had concepts of a plan, Plo dumbed everything down for the clones, knowing that galactic civics wasn't a priority on Kamino. This also didn't mean Plo thought lesser of them, he just knew that he could communicate more effectively by explaining everything, unlike Tarkin's more elite law speak that followed a more political route. The clones voted and the Jedi won by a 2/3 majority, putting them into power of the Galactic Republic until the end of the Clone War. There'd be an address handled by Master Windu. It looked like a PR stunt because he was covered in debris and his Jedi tunic was rolled up, but he came straight from the Senate wreckage to the executive building to deliver this address. He had been listening to Plo while cleaning up. There was worry from the Master of the Order that Tarkin might lead a counter-movement against the Order, but for now, he spoke to the people, promising them willingness to end this conflict, but to end it on their terms. The clones felt confident in their decision to trust the Jedi with leadership positions in the Republic, and the Order had to make some pretty jarring changes themselves. With the Council reconvening inside their chambers and Master Sunube leading an investigation to find Baris and the shuttle she took, Anakin returned to the Senate building to try and find Padme. He was furious, but also concerned. Palpatine hadn't even crossed his mind at this point, because realistically, short, dark, and wrinkly didn't compare to his favorite person in the galaxy. He pulled through rubble with the men of the 501st, who had been working dedicatedly to help their general. They all worked in shifts, and it would be ARC Trooper 5s that found Senator Amidala. She was almost in perfect condition, but she had been very clearly killed by the explosion. Anakin just held her and wept. Rex and 5s would be by their general, as the rest of the men fanned out to find more senators and leadership. Now that the worst had been confirmed, Anakin would lay Padme to rest personally on Naboo and begin his own hunt for Baris. Skywalker didn't speak to anyone. He had Rex and 5s help bring Padme into a shuttle, but once he left, he never said where he'd go following her burial. He just silently vanished into the skies and into hyperspace. While Anakin was beginning his John Wick arc, the Jedi Council forcibly removed half of their members from their seats. These included Mace Windu, Depa Billaba, Obi-Wan, Saesee Tiin, Eth Koth, Plo Koon, and Kit Fisto. The reason behind the removal was far from malevolent. It actually was because of the trust established in the Jedi Order by the clones. The Council believed full-heartedly that they needed to be present on both Coruscant and on the front lines. Of course, these counselors were important for both, but in an effort to show unity with the clones, they couldn't afford to have some of their most successful generals abandon the front lines. In this, they were leaving Yoda, Shakti, Stras Ali, Oppa Rancisis, and Coleman Kaj as remaining members of the High Council. To operate the Republic as a whole would take hundreds of Jedi, something that wasn't realistically feasible, which was one of the main concerns for the clone army. But the lack of corruption that stemmed from the Order in the eyes of the clones led to their trust in the Jedi. With the removal of some of their finest members, scholars, political scientists, economics, and historian Jedi would join this council. While sure, many of these were really rare topics of studies for the Jedi, they were individuals known to help around the galaxy as a whole. So an individual Jedi or two were really good with economics because they helped establish a treaty between warring clans, or rebuild a city's budget. These little deeds were an important piece of the Order, one of many unrecognized actions of it. They were constantly selfless as an Order, and to remain as such, these Jedi were needed to maintain the Republic. Across the galaxy, Barriss Offee threw through a dense nebula and parked her ship, allowing the engines to flow oxygen through the vents and keep the heat on. She felt her chest and wept what little she had left to offer. Baris was in pain, and she felt that in her failure to recognize the importance of patience, she damned the Republic to destruction. She had by this point removed her tracker, but there was a blip on the radar before she removed it, one that Skywalker was speeding across the galaxy to get to. Baris would eventually leave the nebula before Anakin could find her, leaving him to become even more frustrated. But his trail didn't stop from there, because realistically speaking, there was only so far she could go based on a T6 fueling. Anakin would jump to all the nearest refueling stations, and find the trail running cold, leaving him to return to the nebula and start again. On Coruscant, as Anakin's time away from the Jedi continued to elongate, the military council, which consisted of all the Jedi previously removed from the High Council, made a judgment call based on Obi-Wan's word. Due to the Order's inability to continue stretching itself out so thin, Ahsoka was promoted to the rank of Jedi Knight, so that she could lead the 501st in the Caden campaign. By this point, which was about 2 full weeks following the unprecedented attacks, everybody had been removed from the Senate building. This included the Chancellor, who actually survived the attacks but suffocated. Unbeknownst to the Jedi, this came from using his Force powers to preserve his life for about a week, before becoming too weak and losing oxygen to his head, which eventually killed him. At the same time as General Tano, Jedi Knight, made her move for Caden, the Jedi government received a stupefying call from Sereno. In the 2 weeks since the detonation of the Senate building, the war still continued. Battles were fought, sieges were won and lost, and people died. But what the Jedi hadn't considered was Dooku's place in all of this. At this point in the war, the Sith plan was nearing completion. In mere months, Order 66 would come and rain hell down on all the Jedi. But now, Dooku was in a predicament, so he decided to try and do something fun. He could lure the Jedi into a trap. Part of him considered the idea of starting a peace treaty for the actual peace to come, since the entire Senate was decimated, but he could also kill the Jedi while he was at it. He had 2 real options in this peace treaty scenario, and he spent the last 2 weeks curating a plan with his super tactical droids. They were the only individuals he could trust, especially after he tried to off Asajj Ventress. Maybe he should have faked that one. Regardless, he had a chance to do something incredible here. He could establish the government he wanted for the galaxy. With the Jedi in charge, he could manipulate the direction of their new government and force them to pay for their inability to change with the times. Tyrannus could manage everything for his dream galaxy from here on out, and it all started with one call to the Jedi-controlled Republic. As it turned out, it wouldn't be as easy as he thought it would be. When Dooku contacted the Council, they were in the middle of a deep discussion regarding the budgeting plans. The economist Jedi hadn't ever had this large of a budget and deficit to work with, and in their desire to reject the oligarchs, they were kind of working alone in this. There was tension from the public as a result, but the Jedi promised actual results. All they needed was to get to the bottom of running a government. That was the difficult part for them. They had a lot of inner working stuff that they had to do between about 130 members working together in this council. Most of these members weren't even present when Dooku called them. They were speaking to systems, trade route personnel, and local governments. It was a total mess as they tried to get a grip over the system they needed to establish. Yoda demanded to know what his former apprentice wanted, and he smiled warmly at his former master. It was so warm that Yoda actually saw shades of the boy he once taught. It was very confusing until Dooku confessed what he wanted to talk about. He told the council that he wanted to consider ending the war, bringing peace to the galaxy and transforming this conflict into a new governmental order that could bring stability into the cosmos. A slight murmur erupted in the room, but Master Yoda's voice cut through the air and asked why Dooku would all of a sudden come to his senses. Tyrannus stepped towards the hologram and expressed that the Republic as an entity was a filth in the galaxy. The Jedi had since rejected the great oligarchy of the core, and thus proved to him that they were worth saving themselves. He believed that the best step forward was a truce, one that could reshape their galaxy. Dooku's hand stretched out as he told his former master and the Jedi around him to join. He believed that they could rebuild this galaxy together, just the way they wanted to, without anyone to say anything about it. Dooku's smile was sincere, and he did wish to conjure a relationship with his master once more. But Yoda became cold. He told Dooku that he led a droid army, one without thought or feeling. He created General Grievous, a being filled with rage and violence, and expected the Jedi to forgive their war crimes in light of the destroyed Republic. The flaws of the Chancellor and Senate couldn't be overstated, but they did not replace the terror he had brought to the galaxy with his own will. The Jedi would stand firm, the clones would stand firm, and the Republic would withstand his decision to destroy it. The call was ended by Yoda before Dooku could even respond, and it left him feeling empty. He was genuinely surprised. There was hope in this, aside from his desire to destroy the Jedi, that he could reignite his bond with his former instructor, but that relationship died with Yaddle. Dooku shouldn't have been so foolish. Now he would have to destroy everything. Activating the reserve military would be a ruthless strike that could fundamentally disarm the Republic and win this war. As the Jedi responded to this, they fortified Coruscant. There wasn't any actual rationale behind this, aside from the fact that Dooku could become aggressive. What they didn't expect was to be right. The reserve military, which was considerably huge, was sent directly to Coruscant. They would have steamrolled the defense fleet that was present prior to the call with Dooku, but because of his decision to essentially warn them of his desires, he gave them a chance to protect the capital. Dooku would attempt to run a smear campaign against the Jedi for the rejection of peace, but being that he was currently trying to destroy a planet with a population of trillions, he couldn't really look like a hero, because if they wanted peace, he would have killed everyone. On Caeda Neimoidia, General Tano led the 501st down against the Separatist forces. The home world of the Trade Federation was a system left in an uphill fight. Ahsoka was coming down aggressively. Most of this was in frustration. She felt betrayed by Anakin. She understood that he and Padme were close, but she was equally as upset at Barris. But he left her too. Revenge wouldn't solve anything, and despite the darkness she saw from Anakin, it seemed as if he couldn't let go of his demons. That growing hate had always been with him, and Barris unleashed all of it. Part of Ahsoka feared what Anakin would become as a result, but she wanted to finish this war. Tara Sanubi would have accomplished this case without Anakin starting a new chase. Now Tara and his investigators were looking for both Skywalker and for Offee, making their pursuit of the actual culprit even more challenging. As the siege of Coruscant started heating up, with Republic reinforcements coming in from all across the galaxy, the Jedi Council dispatched Masters Windu and Plo Koon with the elite Bad Batch to Sereno to finally deal with Dooku. His smear campaign wasn't working, but in an attempt to restore the Republic, they needed someone to act. The war was heating up. The siege for the core was underway, and the Separatist military would be lost without Dooku. Leaving Grievous and/or Trench in command of such an army could deter the Separatist government from serving with them. That was the hope of the Order, because as this Jedi government worked to restore the system, they were attempting to bring Confederate planets back into the Republic. This was also very effective with neutral systems that fled to coalition following Satine's death. They were essentially strengthening their base, while building good rapport with governmental leaders across the galaxy. As Dooku was sat at his desk inside Castle Sereno, considering the prospect of bringing Maul into his new order, he received a call. General Grievous was making a move for Kuat in the wake of the siege at Coruscant. Instead of making it to Kuat, he was blindsided at his current location at Thyfera by General Kenobi's fleet. Grievous was requesting that Dooku direct Trench to his location, but that was currently impossible. Trench was currently pushing the Separatists at Ringo Vinda against the Tipli and Tiplar sisters. He wouldn't be available until he won or lost that campaign, leaving Grievous to fend off Kenobi's fleet. Obi-Wan was boarding as it was, so Grievous would need to be hasty with his escape. hoping that he could gather another separatist force and move on to the next battle. At the end of the call, Dooku's Magna Guard unit was destroyed by clones in all gray with red marks. Dooku didn't recognize the unit, but his lightsaber ignited. Just as he prepared to move in, the windows behind him shattered and Master Windu lunged in, kicking him in the back of the head. Dooku's face slammed into the desk first, and then he rolled off of it. When he looked up, Master Plo was slamming his blade through the tactical droid that stood before him. Both Jedi pointed their weapons at Dooku and told him to surrender, but he refused because pride or something. His saber ignited once more, and while still wearing his pajamas, he rose to his feet and jabbed at Plo. The Keldor defended himself, knowing how deadly Dooku could be. On the catwalk around the main chamber, the 4 members of Clone Force 99 spread out. Crosshair put his mark on Dooku, just as his brothers did too. Windu moved in, attempting to use Dooku's darkness against him. The current Sith Lord defended himself. He could feel the shifting force. The darkness was fading out of existence, and he couldn't lose here. He tapped on his wrist as he jabbed his saber against Windu's before dragging it back to Plo. The button activated a larger B2 variant with thicker armor, forcing the Bad Batch to abandon their position so that they could defend themselves. Plo and Windu, still interlocking their duel, realized that the clones were in trouble, and because Plo knew Windu was more equipped for this duel against his former friend, left the conflict. He leapt from the bottom floor of the chambers and landed on the ramparts, blocking any shots away from Tak and defending the other members who fired over his shoulders. Mace blocked a strike at his face, using his outside shoulder to hold the blade and pressed off, swinging down and around, cutting off Dooku's leg and using the force to lob him across the floors of the chamber, where he hit his head again and fell unconscious. Once Plo and the Batch finished off the experimental droids, they would take Dooku off of Sereno and return to Kamino, the safest location in the galaxy at the moment. Anakin, in the middle of nowhere, was sitting in silence, seething. His eyes were bloodshot as he scanned over everything once more. He had done this ritual for too long. He was frustrated and upset and angry. He just wanted to find some sense of peace, and he couldn't find it. His peace being found in putting his lightsaber through Barris's face. But that wasn't happening. As he sat here, hopeless that he might never find this culprit, he took a moment to really process everything. As it was following Shmi's death on Tatooine, he resorted to anger. After their marriage, Padme and him had a conversation about his actions, and she made him promise that if the war consumed her, that he wouldn't do the same thing. Padme was sure Shmi wouldn't want innocents slain in her name. Sure, the Tuskens weren't innocent, yeah, but Padme surely didn't want her name to be celebrated in the death of another. She wanted the best of Anakin to shine in his darkest moment, and in abandoning Ahsoka, Anakin wasn't doing what he promised he would do. This led to him crying in the cockpit of the shuttle and realizing where he needed to be. What Anakin didn't realize was the current battle that was presiding over Coruscant. The battle turned into a week-long siege, one where reinforcements were funneled in and out. The Separatists relied heavily on a number of their forces, while the Republic was able to make the best out of a bad situation. It was through how preoccupied the war got that Tarkin wasn't able to rebel against the Jedi. He would actually die at Coruscant during the siege. However, what the Separatists and Dooku couldn't prepare for was the effectiveness of the Republic counter. It wasn't necessarily the fact that the Republic had more forces than the CAS, they didn't, but their aggression prior to Coruscant was so vital to their war effort that they couldn't slow it during their defense. What they moved back to defend the capital was able to maintain, but what they didn't was able to seize the day. Ahsoka's aggressive and even slightly rage-filled assault at Kid and Amodia led to a Separatist stronghold collapse in the core. Obi-Wan's aggressive assault against General Grievous at Thifera would see the good general limping into destruction on the surface. Dooku was captured on Kamino, and the Separatist war machine was in shambles. Baris didn't know it, but she convinced Dooku that overwhelming odds were the key to beating the Republic, and by contacting Master Yoda, Dooku accidentally showed the Jedi his cards. This didn't mean the Jedi government was successful, it definitely wasn't. They were struggling immensely with the siege at Coruscant, but it was because their war effort decisions actually were for the benefit of the Republic as a whole, not for an individual move to take control over the role of Chancellor. After a week of conflict at Coruscant, the CIS would limp away, leaving Admiral Trench at Ringo Vinda as the highest-ranked Separatist officer, though this wasn't known to him. Dooku didn't frequently call him, and Grievous wasn't his pen pal, so the most he knew were the losses at Kid and Amodia and Coruscant. With Mace watching over his former friend on Kamino, the Wolfpack and Master Plo were sent to Cato Nemodia to make sure a rebel movement didn't start. The 501st and General Tano were redirected to Ringo Vinda to assist with the destruction of Admiral Trench. This would be Yularen's revenge battle, and it would be the most satisfying victory of the war. Though there was something ironic about the battle for Ringo Vinda. It was the final victory of the war, but also one that came after the war ended. It was a weird kind of siege, because it started during the Clone War, after Coruscant, but came to a conclusion following the peace treaty. What ended up happening was the Jedi Republic call for peace from the CIS, promising to not invade their territory. They had seen what happened at Coruscant and how their own people reacted. This was a reaction based off of a space battle, because no ground invasion came during the siege itself. The Jedi promised the Confederacy a transition into peace, one that didn't come with martial law or military occupation. However, the droid forces needed to be shot down if they were to comply. There were various demands that were passed around the table, but in the end, the CIS surrendered and handed over their military assets. The droid shutdown did happen at Ringo Vinda, but Trench restarted the droids and fought until his death in a deadly space battle. Yularen would claim victory for all of his fallen comrades, but then they would realize they accidentally fought a battle after the end of the war. Communications had been sent, but they were both blocking communication arrays for each other, so it was seen as a no harm, no foul kind of situation. The Jedi government was a large question for the Confederacy, but after a very rough couple weeks following the conclusion of the war, they were able to rectify what the former Senate could not. They worked dedicatedly, and after some shortfalls and several baby steps, they became an effective government. It was never the plan of the Jedi to remain the political body of the Republic, but until they could fully remove the oligarchs, strip power from the banking clans, and establish peace, then they would not be reinstating the actual Senate. There was a very clear motivation from the Jedi, and it was fresh start. With the chance to do it all themselves, centuries of corruption could be removed in just years. This positive change would take much longer than they wanted, but as they brought in the necessary reform, they would transfer power back to public servants who actually did politics and public service. However, as they did this transition over the years, many people would vote for the Jedi to keep some sort of political power, an overseer role, if you will. This would give the Jedi the power to overstep into the Republic and fix whatever problems the Republic itself created. The war saw the Jedi go from warmongers to warriors to public servants. This switch was very clearly due to the rise and fall of Palpatine. Once he was gone, very few people with a loud public voice were able to badmouth the Jedi. Not because the Jedi didn't allow it, but what could you criticize? They saved the galaxy from war, reformed the Republic government, and brought the peace as they promised. Their role in the Rising Senate, one complete with senators from both the CIS, Neutral Systems, and Republic, would be that of protectors. They would not be treated as lesser, because their mandate was to the people without corruption. The Jedi served the Republic with duty and responsibility. Without such attributes, the Republic would have been lost to another corrupt state. Before any of these major changes could take effect, there was trouble for Skywalker, who finally, before the end of the Ringo Vinda battle, returned to Coruscant. Many of the masters of the military council weren't present, so he had a lovely discussion with Grandmaster Yoda, who was already a very badly stressed out individual, thanks in part to his role as leader of the Republic. He completely removed Anakin from the Jedi Order, citing his actions as irresponsible and forcing his student to bear the weight of his inaction. While the 16-year-old Ahsoka was fully capable and handling herself well, it wasn't her place to bear that weight. And yes, the council saw her fit to lead, and she did assure them that she would do her duty. They didn't want to levy such pressure onto someone who was nearly young enough to still be a youngling. And Anakin's removal from the Jedi Order, he would have nowhere to go, until about 3 weeks later, he'd be brought back on Ahsoka's orders. In the same respect that the Jedi were upset about having to give her the role of knight in Anakin's absence, they were also willing to give her the rank of master for her diligence in their need. The main issue being, the Jedi needed someone to be with the 501st at the time of transition, basically for PR. So Ahsoka's decision to remain sturdy in their time of need made the Jedi all the more trusting of her, because she was willing to be a rock when they couldn't figure out who to serve in the military and or government, not to mention her defeat of Trench. Essentially, Ahsoka took control of one of the most elite divisions and helped win the war, and that was worthy of mastery. She would request that Anakin be brought back into the Order as a Jedi Master for having prepared her enough to handle the adversity she faced at 16 on the battlefront. Skywalker would accept his return to the Order, having nowhere else to go except for Padme's grave at Naboo. He was deeply thankful for Ahsoka's ability to forgive him. He understood now that seeking revenge wouldn't bring people back, and while Barriss wouldn't ever be found, her actions wouldn't end with destroying the Senate. In a weird way, after saving the Republic, Barriss felt obligated to do something right, so she assassinated Maul. It was ironically in the same fashion that she destroyed the Senate building. She planted nanobots in its chambers and detonated them. Sadly for Maul, he would not somehow return from this death. No one would ever see or hear from Barriss ever again. The galaxy would be stronger in the light of the Jedi government, and while they would have their overseer role, there would also be representatives. Individuals who put Dooku away for life for his crimes against the galaxy. The complete reset of the Republic was desperately needed. In such a reset, it was the Jedi who were able to rise to the occasion and save the galaxy from the darkness that tried to prosper off the chaos. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of you. For those of you that didn't see my Sunday video, my mother passed away on Saturday. And a lot of you guys gave me really warm and kind comments, and it meant the world to me. And it means a lot to me, and I'm very appreciative, and I love you all, so special thanks to all of you. You guys, I don't have the words, ironically, so thank you all. But let's talk about this story. So, going into this, I was like, oh, what if the Jedi became a government? And I just kind of ran with it. And it was a lot of fun. It was just one of those stories where I started writing, and I said it in the post under yesterday's video. I was like, I might write, I might not. I was like, you know what? I need to get something out, and this was what came out, and I'm genuinely very pleased with it. The Jedi government was different. It was cool. It was kind of like this really rapid conclusion to the Clone Wars, and I kind of think that would happen. A lot of it just happens like it's a rapid domino effect. It's just everyone in the Senate's dead, the Jedi kind of take control, but it's because the clones want them to have control, and therefore Dooku thinks he can take advantage of the Jedi, and that is kind of like the main reason all of this happens so quickly, is because Dooku thinks he can take control of the Jedi and manipulate them. To even have the main twist of the story, having Dooku offer peace and the Jedi reject it. That was like my main excitement for this, is that Dooku offering them peace and the Jedi being like, nah, you're like a bad guy, like we're not doing that. So that's all I have to say about the story. Again, thank you all. I really do appreciate all of you. I love you all so much. I hope you all enjoyed the story, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.